Welcome everybody. It's that time of the month again. I was about to say welcome to office hours, but as you know, we've rebranded. It's now Ask Tom Live. Because it's live, it seems a silly name because if you're here, you know it's live, and if you're watching the recording, then it's obviously not live. Sing out on the chat line if you can't see me or hear me, anything like that, but hopefully we should be all good. When I do the intro music, I'm always terrified because I'm worried that I'm going to leave my microphone on because I sit here for 10 minutes singing away, singing about my favorite tunes. I'm always petrified that one day that's going to go out live, but I got to remember to keep it on mute. I should say before I get started, apologies for pushing out the office hours by a week from last week. It was obviously meant to be on last week. Last week, unfortunately, right on the Thursday was the anniversary of a passing of a family member. My heart wasn't in it, and I figured I wouldn't be doing a good service to you guys, so pushed it out by a week. My apologies for that, but we've still got some good stuff to talk about today. I just checked the chat line, so make sure people can actually sing on the chat. Piet, I'm glad you're on the line. We'll be talking about you today, but we'll get to that. Let me share my screen, and we'll get straight into it, and we'll talk about what's coming up in the world. Let's jump straight into the slides without further ado. As always, getting in touch is easy. My Twitter DMs are always open via all the other social media channels. Just scan the QR code or head over to linktree/Connor, all the ways. But yeah, I'm still on Twitter, obviously active on Blue Sky as well, where a lot of the Oracle community has since moved. DMs on either of those things will generally get me a response relatively quickly. I try to check them at least once a day or so without getting dragged into the negative cesspool that is social media. As I always said, if you're first time on my office hours, don't panic if from time to time you see content shifted back and forth across the screen. That's such that when we make a YouTube video out of this or the recording, that you don't lose any content on the screen due to my face or anything else being in the way. So that way you make sure you don't ever miss out any content. As always, I like to start with some bits and pieces about what's been happening and what's coming up. And so let's cover them off before we get into the content. Oh, the chat line's going already today. Thank you, Judith. Thank you for that glowing endorsement. First of all, obviously, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 3 months, it is AI World time. The agenda is now live. You can see the huge amount of content there. So yeah, if you're in America or anywhere else in the world, if you can get along to Vegas, I think you can still register. You can probably register almost up to the day. We'd love to see you in Vegas. There are a lot of people that say AI World's just a giant commercial for Oracle, but one of the good things is with so much tech coming out in the database and AI space, it's funny how I've looked at the agenda and I encourage you to do the same. There seems to be a much bigger slant toward tech talks this year than the high level sort of strategic overviews. So if you're into tech, I think it's a special year to get along to Vegas if you can. If you're interested in Apex or Application Express, one thing I do every year is I write a little scraper that goes and gets the official catalog and drags it down into a little Apex app. The reason I like doing that is because, as we know, Apex has the most beautiful faceted search and rules engine and all this kind of stuff. So very, very easy to filter on things you want to do. So if you go to bit.ly AIWorld25, I scrape that every 24 hours just to keep it up to date. But yeah, that's effectively the Oracle AI World agenda in an Application Express application. There's also links in there such that if you want to add things to your personal calendar, it'll let you download ICS files and stuff. So yeah, if you want to build yourself a little schedule for AI World, you can do it with my app and basically integrate into Google Calendar, Outlook Calendar, something that the official agenda app can't do. In terms of that, one of the things that's still going on, if you look at the agenda, you'll see that the rooms aren't yet assigned. The way that works is we look for people favoriting their sessions, and that way we assign the right size room. So if you are in Vegas and planning to come to my session, please head over to the agenda and give it a little love heart next to the favorite. That helps us assign the rooms appropriately to make sure that no one misses out. Because last year was a bit sad. I was incredibly humbled to see my room was full, but I also felt a bit sorry for the people. There's a little line of people outside who said, we didn't get to see your session because they wouldn't let us in. So please do that, and that way we can do your stuff. What have I been doing for the last month? Well, I had one lovely trip into Europe. So the first one was the Polish Oracle Conference, and a few pictures here just to let you know what a wonderful event it is. There's the organizers, Louisa and Camille and their team. They put on a fantastic event, lots of really deep dive levels into tech stuff, just a really friendly event, lots of fun, etc. From there, I went to Austria. If Mirela is on the call, I'm sure she's busy, but Mirela, who's an Oracle ace, runs the Romanian Oracle user group, but also has links into Austria because she now lives in Vienna. She organized an event at the Oracle office there. If you ever get a chance to go to the Oracle office in Vienna, you've got these amazing views over the Blue Danube, just a fantastic thing. I did a 23 AI features talk. There's Mirela there. We were at the airport. We traveled together. Fantastic host. If you ever have any dealings with Mirela in the Vienna, Austria, or Romanian user groups, say hi from me because she'll look after you. A wonderful ace. And then I ended up in Romania. That was for an event for the Romanian user group, but also for the Oracle Women's Leadership Program in Romania. And I got to tell you, if you want to see, and this is not me just big mouthing Oracle because I work for Oracle. If you want to see company culture done right, take a stroll into the Oracle office in Romania. It's just amazing. Just really, close-knit, tight-knit community. I did a series of tech talks there for 23 features and a sort of a soft skills talk for the Oracle Women's Leadership Group. Both groups just wonderful human beings, just really welcoming, very, very nice, so hospitable, really engaged, love to talk, love to, just socialize, etc. That's Roxana in the middle there. She was the sort of the coordinator for it, and we had Violetta and, I've forgotten the name. 3 lovely women from Romania who looked after me so wonderfully there. Fantastic place to go to. Then I did a Romanian user group event that once again organized by Mirela. And let me give you an example of what kind of people these are. One of the Oracle colleagues, who I'd never met before, says, seeing as you've got a free night here in Romania, I've got some tickets to the open air opera with Andrea Bocelli. Do you want to come along? Like, can you believe it? So yeah, so if you ever get a chance, head to Romania. What a wonderful, wonderful bunch of people that was. What's coming up for me? First time ever in the South African User Group Conference in November. Really looking forward to that. A whole bunch of aces from EPM and cloud and database going as well. So the ACE program continues to thrive and now in South Africa. After that, finally, a conference is back home. Don't have to go anywhere. There'll be the Perth event for the Oslo conference, followed by the Melbourne event, which will be a quick hop across the country for me. And following that, we've lined it up 2 days in a row. You've then got the New Zealand conference 2 days after that. So if you're anywhere in APAC, India, Asia, etc., and you don't want to travel all the way to the US or all the way to Europe, get on down to the Australian events, Perth, Melbourne, and New Zealand. Lots of fun. They're obviously smaller scale than things like AI World. Normally we have like 100 or so people, but that makes the engagement much more interesting. You have a lot more better Q&A and a lot more socializing. So some really, really good events coming up. And as I always say, why do I put these slides on there? Because I want you all to support your local Oracle user groups. I did a podcast with Gilson, ACE director, as part of the ACE program the other night, and we were chatting about how community is just such an amazing thing. Like, it's how we all grow and prosper. As I always do, I rant about that every month. Finally, Ords 25 2.3 is out. This literally has been out now for a month, but it literally came out the day after my last office hours. And so I wanted to make sure that people knew about it. So yeah, so make sure people always talk to me about things like SQL CL, SQL Developer, and Ords. They go, oh, yeah, I know a new version's out, but it's tough to upgrade. Like, literally all these products are literally unzip and done. So try to get into that mindset of when these releases come out, it's good to actually just go ahead and upgrade. Yes, you have to do some regression testing, but the base functionality obviously never changes. But yeah, be aware that these things aren't upgrading the database, which has maybe a slightly higher risk profile. This is literally unzip and done. So try to stay up to date, especially with client tools like SQL Developer and SQL CL, because you'll be rewarded for it. Okay, what has come in today? Over the last month, some questions. We got some questions on private temporary tables. I've got an update for you on VDOL history, courtesy of Pete on the line. Interesting thing about optimizer stats and importing them, passing information between sessions. Someone cannot convert a table to partitioned using the wonderful online partition sort of alter table syntax. How many union ors can you have in a SQL statement? How to efficiently create materialized views, and an interesting one about duplicate aliases in a SQL statement. What have we got? 8 there. Whew, it's going to be a big night. But some of these are pretty fast. I'm hoping we'll get through a good chunk of them. So without further ado, let's get stuck into it. Drink of water so I don't get dry. Here's the first question that came in. We are hitting limits with private temporary tables. It seems that when we create too many in a session, we get an error. Can the limit be lifted? My first response to this was, why would you need so many private temporary tables in a session? But there was a bit of back and forth with this customer about that, and I'll return to that after the demo. But it is one of the interesting things where private temporary tables are like global temporary tables. You can create them on the fly. They exist purely in your session. And there is a limit, as we'll see in a second, but I'm very surprised as to why someone would ever actually hit it. But let's have a look at the demo, and then we'll explore some options. Now, if you're unfamiliar, a private temporary table is similar to the old concept, the original concept of global temporary tables. But a global temporary table you get to define once. Its definition is stored in the data dictionary, and then all sessions can use it, but their data is isolated to their session. In a private temporary table, yes, the data is private to your session, but the definition is also private to your session. The actual definition is not stored in the data dictionary, it's stored literally locally in your session memory, and therefore two sessions could create the same private temporary tables with the same private temporary table names, but with different columns, etc. So it's, you could say, a more private version of a temporary table. So I've created here, as you're probably familiar, if you've ever used them before, there's a fixed prefix you have to use. I know that probably breaks all sorts of data modeling rules about, the name of things, defining what they are, but in my case, the default prefix is you have to use $PTT for every private temporary table. So I've created number 1 here, and I might be using it in my session. I create number 2, I create number 3. I can create up to 16 private temporary tables. Why you would need 16 different private temporary tables in a session is up for debate, but once you get to 16 and try create a 17th, you get an error. There is a limit for the number of private temporary tables you're allowed to have in your database session. Having said that, I might need to, I thought my dog was waiting at the door there, but no, he's retreated back to his bed. So yes, there is a limit of 16 private temporary tables in a database session. This customer is hitting that limit, and the question is, what can we do about it? Well, there is a hidden parameter, and as we always say with hidden parameters, only use them with the guidance of Oracle support, and unfortunately you can't do it at session level. So you can't do alter session set PTT max num, and as the parameter name suggests, it's private temporary table, maximum number of them. But what you can do is set it at system level. So I can do it at entire instance level, and then I need to bounce my database, in this case just a pluggable, and that will now pick up that new setting. So now I can create 1 temporary table. I can create 2, and I can create 16 as before, but I can now create 17, 18, 19, and 20 because I set the limit to 20. And if I try to do 21, then I get the same error. So you can adjust that hidden parameter, once again with the guidance of Oracle support, if you want to get lots and lots of private temporary tables in your sessions. Why? I'm not sure. One of the things people ask me then is, well, why would you have a limit? What is the issue with having an extraordinary number of private temporary tables? And I thought I'd do some research into this. And my first thought was, well, given that the definition and everything and the data must be stored locally to that session, maybe it's going to cost you in terms of maybe PGA, your private memory. So I thought I'd do this little demo. I've created, this is a fresh connection, so all my private temporary tables have gone. I create a private temporary table number 1. I've created a single column X of char 2000. This is just me being lazy. When I put a row in there, no matter what small data I put in it, it'll occupy all 2000 bytes because it's a char field. So at the moment, my session has occupied, 5 megabytes of PGA, and I'm going to insert effectively, and there's nothing in temporary memory, temporary segments, and I'm going to insert row num from DBA source. DBA source, I think, is what do we got here? 700,000 rows on this little database. So 700,000 times 2,000 characters is obviously a big chunk of data that's now stored in this private temporary table. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's going to blow up my PGA. That's why we have a limit. Thankfully, when I looked, you can see my PGA did have a bit of a jump. It went from 5 megabytes up to 10 megabytes. So definitely we consumed a fair chunk of memory there. But 2,000 times 400, 2,000 times 700,000 is a lot more than an extra 5 megabytes. So where did it go? Well, if we look on our $V sort usage, we can see we created a very, very large temporary segment as well. So private temporary tables seem to use the same mechanism as normal temporary work areas, whether it's sorting, hash joins, etc. We consume memory up to an allowable threshold, and then when it goes past that, we simply dump it down to temporary space. So to be honest, I don't know why we have a limit. I suppose even 5 megabytes is, if you had lots and lots of different private temporary tables, I'd imagine I should do a test actually to see if I had lots of temporary tables, whether everyone will get 5 megabytes at least. But still, I'm not entirely sure of the logistics as to why 16 is the limit in terms of implementation and server resources impact. Having said that, let's go back to the slides. As I said, the PJ seems to be okay, but I put here, maybe look at your application design. And the reason I say this is one of the things that a lot of other databases have done in the past, not so much nowadays, but the SQL servers and DB2s of the world, because those databases, depending on how they're configured, take read locks. A really common use case in those databases was whenever you ran a query, you stored the results in a temporary table. And I fully admit that doing temporary storage in those databases is normally pretty easy. You just simply do insert into, and I think a temporary table starts with a hash sign, so it just gets dynamically created on the fly. But the reason that requirement was there is because people were so petrified about opening a cursor and querying data over a long period of time and taking read locks. So what they do is they simply dump the data, the results, into a temporary table and then read that because it's not going to impact the read locking characteristics of the system. So I wouldn't be surprised, I haven't challenged this customer yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if a proliferation of private temporary tables is someone running a SQL Server mindset on the Oracle database. And the reason you don't need to, obviously, is because, as we know, in Oracle, readers don't block writers and writers don't block readers. And the most important thing is we never take read locks. So maybe have a look at your application design. If you've got that many private temporary tables, I think maybe you're fighting the product, as we say. And what's the old adage we say? If you fight the product, the product will generally fight back. Okay, that's number one. Number two, Pete DeVissa, an Oracle ace, good friend of mine. I saw him in Poland. No, I didn't see him in Poland because I think he broke his... Is that right, Pete? Did you break your leg or broke an ankle or something? You were meant to be there, but I didn't see you. Is that correct? Sing out in the chat line if I'm speaking nonsense here, but that was my recollection. Quick story, funnily enough, just before I went to Poland, I actually fell down my stairs at home and I almost couldn't get on the plane, so that was nearly a disaster as well. But VDollar SQL history, an update. Oops, I need to go back. There's no question here. This is just, one of my 23 AI features is a discussion of the VDollar SQL history view, which is a new facility, which I'll show you in a second in 23 AI. And then, like all good aces who are curious by design, Pete went out and actually had a look and said, well, let's have, explore a bit further. And so, so we thought we'll actually have a look and see what's going on here. So I thought I'd do an update based on the information he's provided so I could share it with all you as well, and also give a few extra bits and pieces just to round off the feature. So this is inspired by Pete's research, plus we'll add a little bit more as well. Okay, so for those that haven't seen this feature, I'm now connected to a 23 AI database, so this is not present on 21 or 19. I'll give you a whirlwind introduction to the feature itself. As the name suggests, it lets you see a history of SQLs that you've run in your session. To enable it, it's something you have to enable at database level, and then you bounce your pluggable database. I've connected as the Scott user here, and I run some queries. I run select count star from M, count star from department, and select count star from non-existent table. So even failed SQLs will be grabbed in my VDollar SQL history. If I go look, there's this new view. I scroll up, VDollar SQL history, and as you can see, we don't just grab the text, we grab a whole lot of metrics about this stuff, which is very, very cool. If I go query what I got in VDollar SQL history in this particular session, you can see I've got my select count star from M, count star from dep, and my count star from non-existent table. It even gave me an error code saying, yep, there was error 942 for that particular one. So we got the error codes, we got this, the SQLs we run. You see these other ones in here? That's because when I connect as SQL Plus runs some SQLs on my behalf, typically in my log on to SQL, even they get captured as well. And then I just demonstrate that, for example, here, in this connection, I can only see my sessions stuff. So it's protected, other people can't see your stuff. This is the demo I do for 23 AI, and now I need to revisit it to improve this information. There's a couple of errors here, and also to expand on what you can see. So the first one is, okay, let me go far to this. It tells me to go to other tabs first. So I'm going to go this one first. If I run that, I connect to Scott, okay, and run some queries here as well. And then I go to this one and also connect to Scott and run some other queries as well. So now I've got 3 sessions that were called Scott running some SQL queries. If I come back here, now if I connect as a DBA, you can actually see across sessions. DBAs can see all of the $SQL history. So we can see here, we've got, for example, now a distinct set of SIDs. So because this user here is a DBA level, they can see effectively SID 23, which is one of the Scott sessions, another session said 60 with another one, and the original one we had in this session, which was 293. So they can see all of the SQL history sessions, which is what you'd expect for a DBA. However, here's a slightly more interesting one. All right, if I connect to Scott, notice they can also see across sessions, which is a contradiction to what I said a few minutes ago. As far as I can work out, it's now based not on SID, but on schema. So I can see, if I connect to Scott, I can see the SQL history for all the schemas that were connected as Scott. So even here I'm connected to Scott, I'm just a standard user, not a DBA. I can see multiple schemas. So it looks to me like you can actually see across sessions as long as you're attached to the same schema. So that's something to keep in worthy of note here. Now, if I connect as a totally different user, a HR user, for example, and run some queries as a HR user, then like I said in the original demo, HR can only see his schemas. He can't see the Scott schema. He can only see his stuff. But as we saw, be aware that it seems to span sessions as long as you're in the same schema. So that's the first thing I wanted to share, but that DBAs can see everything, and it looks like schemas can go across sessions when they're looking at SQL history. Now, the other thing is, how much SQL history can we hold on to? And that was something that Pete was looking at. It's like, I'm going to run now 200 versions of this query. It's the same query, just run 200 single times, but a SQL history captures every single occurrence. You can see here, even in HR, I've got three occurrences already, and I've tried to add another 200. When I now query SQL history, I should get, what I got, 7 there, 200 there, 207 rows, and I get 60. I don't get all of them. There is a upper limit to how many of these SQL statements we will collect. Now, this makes reasonable sense because I could run, for example, a primary key lookup 1,000 times a second on your average database with no drama at all. So over a minute, I've literally got 60,000, hundreds of thousands. That's an enormous drain on memory that would actually be consumed if we wanted to capture the SQL history of every single statement. That's just not really practical because don't forget, we're catching an individual occurrence. It's actually each execution, not just distinct SQL statements. The question is, what if I would like more than 60? Do we have any control over that? Well, you'll be pleased to know that I asked around internally, and we do have a hidden parameter, as always. What do we do with hidden parameters? We use them under the guidance of Oracle support, and we have a thing called SQL history buffers. And in this case, I bounced it up to 80. The nice thing is, I didn't have to bounce my database. You can't do it at session level. You can't say a particular session only has this many buffers, but you can do it at instance level and not have to bounce the database, which is nice. So now I connect as HR again. I've got a brand new session. I run 200 of these, and I run my query against SQL history again, and now it went up to 84 rows in this case. So slightly more than the 60 I had before. So you can control it, but it is a system level thing, not a session level thing. And as always, because it's a hidden parameter, use under the guidance of Oracle support. So hopefully that adds a bit more clarity to the way the SQL history feature works. Still a very, very cool feature in 23 AI. A final note here. Be careful with shared schemas. If just because if I log on as the Scott schema and I run a somewhat dubious SQL statement, then other people logging onto the Scott schema might be able to see your SQL history. I put a joke there about querying your favorite porn sites, but in reality, things like if you're doing SQL statements that have things like passwords or sensitive information in it, be aware if you've turned on SQL history, then other people connecting looks like they'll be able to see that stuff as well. So just a worthy of note there. Bernard's asked the question, is there some kind of filter only store queries which use more than X CPU memory or whatever? Not to my knowledge. I'll ask around, but I'm pretty sure that's not the case. And my understanding would be is that obviously to keep this as efficient as possible, because obviously, with SQL history turned off, we just run your SQL. When it's on, we now have to keep a effectively cyclic buffer of SQLs that have been running. What we don't want to do is actually have a lot of stuff going on, processing of that data, because understandably that would become very, very costly, I'd imagine. But I like the idea, and I'll pass along internally, because as you know, when we do 23 AI RUs nowadays, we're constantly adding incremental functionality. So it's certainly an idea that sounds pretty cool. Oops, gone too far. 9:26, dearie me. Slow statistics import. Here's the question that came in. When we import database statistics from one database to another, the import process is extremely slow. However, if we explicitly nominate a value for the statistics ID, then things are much faster. What's going on? I don't have a demo for this one because I want to give a shout out to another one of our aces, Yongmin Park, who blogged about this. And then it got passed along internally for us to do some diagnosis as to why it was going on. Like he blogged about why it was slow without the stat ID. And then we did a bit of research. And so I wanted to give him a shout out for finding the issue. And I'm going to explain it to you now, such that if you're using import statistics, which is a pretty cool idea, then yeah, you'll be able to avoid any performance issues. Now, I haven't got demo here because importing database statistics can take minutes. So I took screenshots because I didn't want to bore you with, as we sat here for 4 minutes going, oh yes, let's wait for the import to run. So if you haven't done import and export of database statistics before, here's how we set it up. The first thing you do is you create what's called a stat table, which creates the appropriate structure to hold all the statistics you would like to export. Once you've done that, you can now export your database stats. You can export table stats, schema stats, database stats, etc. In this case, I'm doing them all. Now I'm going to try import them. And if I try import the database stats, just with giving the name of the table I've just exported into, it takes 3 minutes and 11 seconds I ran this on this laptop database here, which is, it's got maybe a couple of dozen tables that I've created over the years, maybe an Apex instance, but that's about it. Otherwise, it's a fairly empty database. And it took 3 minutes. That's a long time. If I literally do the exact same exercise, but this time give it a stat ID, in this case, my stats, now the import is 4 times faster. Now that seems very, very strange, doesn't it? Now, before I reveal why, I will say that the reason I'm a big fan of export and importing stats is gathering stats on your production system is a resource drain on your production system. You can avoid that if you've got things like a standby database, snapshot standby, active data guard, etc. You could gather stats on your clone of production, export them, and then import in production. Nice little way of avoiding putting a resource drain on your production system. That's why I'm a fan of export and import of stats. How do we find out when things are slow? Well, we put a trace on. That's a common performance tuning technique. We may as well use it on this database dictionary import as well. So we put a trace on, we turn on import stats, we go through the normal process, we gather a trace file, we run tkprof, we look for the worst ones, and this is what comes out. This is the one that's very, very slow. And we're doing this insert into DBMS stats ID map tab, select from all stats. We're joining the information up to our user and objects and tab comments. So it looks like partition table kind of information here. I'm guessing that's partition tables and maybe composite partition tables. That's just a guess, but we're doing this join and it seems to be very, very slow. This is the one that takes all the time. If I go look in the data dictionary for the stat table that's created when we run dbms create stat table, the database puts an index on that query. It puts one index on it. It's interesting, the index name is the same as the table name, and these are the columns. Stat ID is the leading column, then type C5, C1, 2, 3, 4, and version. Now, if I go back to this particular insert that's running slowly, and we highlight the columns that are in the index, you can see it's referencing a good chunk of them. We start with stat ID as null, which, even though is null is a problem, is null is effectively you can think of it as a static value. And then we do have type, we have C5, we have C1. We should be able to take advantage of this index, right? Unfortunately, we don't. If we have a stat ID, which is like this, then as it turns out, we do take advantage of the index, which explains the dramatic performance change. Now the question is this something we would expect? Should we be able to use a null for the leading column and then a in list for the second column? Well, it turns out the optimizer can do that. It just happens that it's a bug. And it turns out that this is a bug that's known in various versions of 19 and 21 and 23, which is if the prior column has an is null predicate, then an in list is not used. It's a regression that got introduced at some stage ago. But it is a genuine bug. The optimizer is smart enough to actually use it. It just is not using it at the moment. It's literally been fixed a long time ago. It got fixed way back in 19.14. And if you want to activate it, you simply do alter session fix control this on. You might be thinking, why is it not actually just a patch that's in an RU for Oracle database? Well, this is an optimizer fix. So this is not a bug in DBMS stats. DBMS stats is doing the exact SQL it's meant to be doing. It's a bug in the optimizer. And if you're familiar with applying RUs to the database, you know that we, as part of an RU, send down a bundle of optimizer patches as part of the RU, but we leave it up to you to activate them. And the reason we do that is because, understandably, people aren't thrilled with introducing a whole stack of optimizer functionality changes with an RU because it might have some impact on their performance. It might make things faster, might make things slower, but they don't want to change. So if you check out Mike Dietrich's blog, you'll see information about how to apply these things, but DBMS Optimizer Bundle is the API that we provide. When you apply an RU, all the bug fixes and security patches go in, and if you want to turn on the optimizer fixes as well, then you can do it selectively yourself. So DBMS Optimizer Bundle lets you turn a whole stack on at once if you want to, but if you want to, you can actually just do it with a single fix control to fix this particular issue if you want to in the Oracle database. So that's a nice little fix, and then your DBMS stats will work. If you'd rather not be tinkering with fix controls and DBMS Optimizer bundles and stuff like that, well, just set the stat ID. Nice and simple, right? If you set a stat ID, the problem goes away. I'd argue it's probably a good idea to set the stat ID always anyway, because you can give it a nice, meaningful name as to why you exported the stats. Anyway, there we go. Good thing is in 23AI, that fix is now included in the latest RU, and it's core part of the product. So it's just the problem goes away. DBMS stats runs fine in 23AI. Passing information between sessions. Here's the question that came in. We need to pass data between multiple database sessions, independent of any transactions that are outstanding or mechanisms. What are our options? And they are plentiful. And so I wanted to run through them tonight just to show some of the options. Some of these are, the reason we have so many options is a lot of these features have evolved over time in the Oracle database versions. And I'll give you some ideas for which ones I like, but they're all available to us. So let's, where are we? Now I'm going to pass information between some sessions, and I'm going to store that information in a table, not because we need a table, because we want this to be independent of transactions. I'm really just creating a table such that we can pass some information around and then log it in a table to prove that we actually passed it. So this is really just to prove that we're successfully passing information. Don't think of it as something that's required. Now, the first option I want to talk about is not necessarily passing information between sessions. It's more the ability to, for example, record information without impacting the current transaction. And it's called an autonomous transaction. It's really, really simple to set up. I've got a procedure here. It doesn't have to be a procedure. It can be an anonymous block. But all I'm doing is I'm saying I've got a procedure here which inserts into my message table. But it runs in a separate transaction to the calling environment. As a result, this thing can do transactions and commit or roll back without impacting the outstanding session transactions that are there. Just to prove that, lets me create a session on the delete on the employee table. I'll run my separate transaction, which had a commit instance. So I've done a commit here, but it was in a separate transaction. I roll back the delete from employee. If this thing here had committed, that rollback will have no effect and my employee table would be empty, but my employee table has been magically resurrected. So, and just to prove that we actually did successfully log the transaction, even though we rolled back, we have a row in our message table. That's probably the simplest form. The reason I put this in here is often the reason people ask me questions about how do I pass information between sessions is because what they really wanted to achieve was to be able to record information in a table that didn't impact the current transaction. So you don't have to actually pass information back and forth between sessions to do that. You can do it with an autonomous transaction much, much easier and satisfies that requirement. Let's move on now to actually genuinely passing information between sessions. Second one, If it's just some static data that you want to pass, or a small set of data, then you could use a context variable. Now, I'll show you what a context variable is first, and then we'll describe how we can use it to pass information between sessions. You've been using context variables forever, even if you maybe are unaware of it. Whenever you do something like select sys context user environment server host from Joule, which gives you some information about the current environment. This laptop here is called Bailey, name of my greyhound. A context is actually effectively like an in-memory array or a namespace. So what happens is when you do something like this, we actually have provided automatically in the database a context called user environment, information about the environment your user is running in. I can pass in a key, and then for a given key, there will be a value assigned to it. Most people have used user env forever. What they don't realize is you can actually create your own context. You're not bound just by the ones that we provide automatically in the database. So I can create my own. I'll create one called my context. Now, contexts were originally built with the aim of providing security predicates in our row-level security operation. And therefore, we wanted to protect the way people can access context variables in terms of setting them. You wouldn't want someone just being able to set their own user environment variables, for example, to change the name of the server host. So in the same way with your own context, they're protected by a PL/SQL routine, in this case, a package. That'll be the only way you can set variables in this context. That's why we say using and then the name of a PL/SQL routine, which does not yet exist. So now I need to build it. I'm going to have a package called pkg context up here, and I'm going to simply let you set the value. You pass in a key, you pass in a value, and it's going to set a key and value for this particular context. So when I look at the actual package body, we use dbms session. dbms session set context for this particular context for the key and value I've passed in. The reason the package is bound to a context is it stops you from just calling this directly on the command line to actually set a context variable. You can only make this call through the package that you've attached to the context. Now, so it works. So I can say for my context called my context, I can set a key. For the key of dog, I can set the value of greyhound. And so when I query what's the value of my context dog, I get greyhound back. Now, if I go to session 2, and run. In this session, what's the value of my context dog? You can see I get null. A standard context is only session specific. So because I set the context value in this session, I can see it, I can't see it in the other session. So how does this come back to passing data between sessions? Well, I'll drop that context and build a new one where I can say create a context, once again attached to a package, but it's accessed globally, which means this context can now share values between sessions across an entire instance. Now we have to build a package. Now the package now has some extra work that needs to be done. The way we share information across sessions is we set effectively another layer of key or another layer of identifier saying, who am I as a client? The same clients across multiple sessions will be able to see the same set of context values. So now I've got a new API here called setMyID and the original set value. When I flesh out the package, I now have two APIs. The first one does this dbms session set identifier, and this sets the thing called the client identifier in your session. Every session that has the same client identifier will be able to share the same context values. Then this is the same. Now it's slightly different in terms of setting a value. I still set my context and my key and my value, but I'm saying I set the context value that you've passed in for this particular key for this particular client identifier, which has been set here. So now I've got everything in place. I can now show you how we share information across sessions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to tell the database, who am I as a client? So it might be, for example, application number 1. Every session that connects as running as an application called app 1, it can connect as any user at once, but every session that says I'm application number 1, if I set dog and greyhound, then I can see it obviously just like before. But if I go over to this session, I haven't told this session that I'm app 1, so I don't get to see the context. But if I say, by the way, I'm also a client of application number 1, I can now see that context. It's shared between all the sessions that identify themselves as app 1. If I set myself as app 2, I could have a different set of context variables as well. So that's context. If you just need to share some scalar data across sessions, context variables are a very easy way of doing that. There's no transactions going on here as well. That's pretty cool. Just making sure there's no tag. Good. Option 3 is a thing called pipes that arrived way back in Oracle 7. A pipe is basically a little piece of shared memory, and we call it a pipe because you push things in and another thing pulls it off. You can think about if you had a tube and you push marbles in there, you can keep pushing marbles in until the pipe is full, and then you can't push any more marbles in until someone lets one come out the other end. And that mindset is what a pipe is here. So a pipe needs two things: someone to push messages in the pipe and someone to pull messages off the pipe. So we need two APIs. To do it, we simply have effectively pack a message into the pipe, and then we give a pipe a name. You can have as many pipes as you want. I can nominate how big the pipe is allowed to be before it gets full. If I put more than that much information into the pipe, then the pipe will stall when I try to push information in. It's a way of making sure we don't burn up all our SGA. So in this case, I pack a message into the pipe, and then I send the message. And as long as it comes back with a zero status, it means it successfully did it. If I got a non-zero status, it means typically the pipe is full, or the pipe didn't exist, or I didn't have access to it, etc. Someone's saying, can we get the recorded session? Of course, all these sessions are recorded. You'll see them at asktom.oracle.com in a few days' time. So yeah, don't panic if you have to leave, or if you're just plain bored. So that's my send message. One of the nice things is, notice I didn't create this object. A pipe send message will actually create a pipe name with that name on the fly the first time it gets used. Now I need something to actually get those messages off the pipe. And so I've got a procedure here called get message. And what it does is it's a polling routine. So this here simply will sit and listen on this pipe, for lack of a better term, until someone puts a message in there. Once a message arrives, it'll take it off and complete work. If this is a non-zero, it means we waited for so long that we have never actually got a message back on the pipe. So you can nominate a timeout as well, but by default, we wait pretty much forever. When I say forever, I think it's 10 days. I think the actual timeout is 86,400 two zeros. So 10 days is what we wait. But yeah, so you think of that as forever. Otherwise, we actually got a message, so we unpack it. And in this case, as I said, just for proof, I'm going to put it into our message table. So let's go over to session 2. And you can see get message is a blocking call. This is now sitting there listening to see if anything comes on the pipe. Here, I'll now send a message to the pipe. And if I go back to session 2, literally instantaneously, you can see this routine finished, and we actually managed to log the fact that we put a pipe in there. It works very, very nice. So that's how pipe works. Be aware that typically what happens is the thing that's doing get message will sit there and just sit in a loop, an endless loop, get a message, process it, get a message, process it, etc. So that's option 3, which is pipes. Option 4 is queues. Now, by default, if you've ever used Oracle's advanced queuing, out of the box, if you do a very simple queue where you put things on a queue, pull things off a queue, it's transactional. You do a commit to make the message persistent, and then you dequeue the message and commit to remove it from the queue. We can, however, use queues to actually do non-transactional memory-based messaging as well. There's a bazillion options in queuing, which are super cool. So as we know, if you haven't used queuing before, when we put payload objects onto our queues, we have a choice typically of just raw bytes or an abstract Oracle type. So I'm going to use a my message type here. So it's an object type. To create a queue, I create a queue table. Once I've created the queue table, I can create a queue on top of that table. And once I've created the queue, I then start the queue, which enables it for enqueuing and dequeuing. Just a quick backwards, when I create the my queue table, I have to tell it what is the data type I'll be storing my objects on there. As for our pipes, we need two routines now, an API to put something on the queue and an API to listen on the queue and take things off. So when it comes to sending a message, it's a little bit more verbose, but these are the kind of things you write once and then copy and paste for the end of time. When you're enqueuing, I'll start at the bottom actually. When you put a message on a queue, the things you need are the queue name, any enqueue options you want to set, any message properties, and then the actual message itself, and it sends you back a message ID, a unique key to that message should you want to use it later on the track. So the enqueue options and property options are actually embedded data types in DBMS AQ. The handler is just a raw message that comes back. But one of the nice things you can do is these properties have a lot of things you can set, but one of them is for the enqueue, you can say, I want this to be immediately visible, which means it's non-transactional. If you're doing a persistent queue, it means it would be autonomous. An autonomous transaction would commit it. But in this case, I'm saying immediate visibility, and I want this message to be buffered. The cool thing when you combine these two things, what we're saying is a message becomes buffered. It sits in the SGA as opposed to sitting in the queue table. So it's incredibly efficient. And it's immediately visible to anyone that's listening on that queue. And the nice thing is, I won't do a demo of that here, is buffered queues have all the same characteristics as your PGA. If you have too many messages in the buffer, it'll be flushed down to the table itself. So it self-manages the memory, etc. I now need a get message. So same thing in this case, I'm going to have some DQ options, some properties, etc. But the key thing is I'm going to DQ I'm going to listen on this particular queue. One of the DQ options is how long I'm prepared to wait. By default is forever. So I'm going to wait up to 60 seconds. And then once again, I'll get the payload back in my message. And once again, just to prove that we got it, I'm storing it in our message table. So if we go to session 2, once again, now I'm going to sit and wait on this queue. He's listening on the queue for up to 60 seconds. And I come back here. I can send a message, this time hello queue. And hopefully when I go over here, voila, this finished. And as you can see, it managed to store hello queue. And as you can see, there is a huge amount of options you can run to send messages. Now, a couple of points I'll make here. Number one, even though I've just showed you of these ways of doing non-transactional messaging, I'd argue that often you probably want a transactional. And the reason I say that is let me start again. The reason I say that is when you inquiry on customers as to why they want to pass messages back and forth and get the genuine requirement, common examples of things like, I want to be able to send an email when someone does something in the database. I want to be able to write something to a file, something along those lines, which is they want to do something sort of pseudo outside the database, and that's why they need to do it outside of a transaction. I say you probably actually want it to be transactional, even if you're doing something like that, because transactions roll back. And as a result, you might do something like when a trigger fires in the database, I send an email. Well, what if that transaction subsequently failed? You haven't actually done the database work that was prompting the email, yet the email went anyway. So often things which you don't think need to be transactional actually are probably better suited to be transactional, especially if you're interacting with things outside the database. Especially when it comes to things like database triggers and updates, which actually triggers can fire multiple times for the same row being updated, depending on things called a write restart and write consistency. So you could send 20 emails off to someone and then have the transaction roll back. People are going to get upset with that. So you'd be amazed how many times that you think something doesn't need to be transactional when maybe it did want to be transactional. Carlton said, message via name of dummy object message for content payload. I'm not sure I understand what you mean there, Carsten, but ping me on Twitter offline and I'll work that out later on. Number 2, pipes are SGA. They are SGA memory, and unlike queues, they become your responsibility. If you simply say, I want my pipe to be ridiculously sized, then yeah, you can simply burn up a lot of memory in your SGA. We'll simply keep giving you memory. Be aware of that. There's no dumping to temp, etc. when it comes to pipes. The other issue with pipes is, as I said, that metaphor is they literally can fill. If your program that was listening on the pipe to pull messages off it crashes and isn't restarted, then you could very quickly get to a point where you fill the pipe and trying to put messages on it will simply stall. They sit there forever. So you need to be a bit more careful with pipes. Pipes are more the predecessor to queues, I'd imagine, because pipes are in Oracle 7, queues came along in Oracle 8. And as I said, my preference is queues, because even that demo is the most trivial example of queues. Queues have all these things that you can have multiple subscribers, so you could put one message on that needs to be consumed by 10 different applications or people. You can also have things like asynchronous notification. You don't have to have something listing on a queue. You could actually put a message on a queue, and the act of putting that message on automatically notifies interested parties. So there's so many more options with queues. So my preference generally is if you're doing something which is passing information between sessions, transactional or otherwise, then take a look at AQ. It's pretty impressive. Okay. I haven't been checking the Q&A. Okay. Schema based now. Okay, cool. No worries. PC, I want to set my SQL history buffers to 100K. Well, knock yourself out, Pete. Let me know how it goes for you. The fact that we set it to 60 would suggest to me that 100K is maybe an order of magnitude beyond probably what anyone's tested. Anyway, let us continue. Oh, I've shut down my chat line. Okay, what do we got? 10 minutes left. Oh, we get maybe a couple more in. Converting compressed indexes. Here's the question that came in. We wanted to convert an existing table to partitioned, but it would not let us perform the conversion we wanted with compressed indexes. Is this a bug? A bug? Is this a bug? And my answer is maybe. And the best way of describing that is there's some documentation anomalies here, and there's some functionality anomalies here as well, which I thought I'd show, and then I'll sort of sit on the fence at the end of it. I'm going to create a table, unpartitioned table here called big. It's just a copy of DBA objects. And I'm going to create a globally partitioned compressed index on that table. If I drop that index, and sorry, I did that just to prove that you can create a partitioned index that is globally partitioned and compressed and a hash index on a table, no problems. The database supports that fine. Let me drop that index now and create it that's not partitioned. So I have an unpartitioned table with a stock standard index on that table, and I want to now convert that table to the scenario you just saw. I'm going to convert it to a partitioned table with a globally partitioned compressed index. And this is the command I would use to do it. Alter table, modify, partition by hash, and update my index to say, yep, I want it to be globally partitioned by hash, partition date, compressed to. We know I can create an index that does that, but it seems to tell me I can't do an alter table to do that, which is frustrating. Now, because this syntax is getting quite long, I thought maybe I just need to shuffle this around a bit. So I tried compress to at the start. I tried compress to in the middle before the partitions. None of these things works. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, that's a fair enough restriction. That's just how it is. I can create the index as partitioned compressed hash, but I can't do an alter table to achieve it. However, if I drop that table, recreate it, and create the index with compressed to, so it's not partitioned, it's just compressed to, and then go ahead and do the alter table, and I leave the compressed to off, well, that's fine. And what blew my mind was it kept the compression. So I can't put compressed to there, but if it happened to have compressed to before I even started, it kept that for me. Very strange. So it can be done, but under this sort of strange set of circumstances. And so I thought, let's have a look in the documentation and see what's right. So the docs say no. If you go to the 19C in evolving a non-partition table in 19C, right, it says the partitioning clause cannot change the uniqueness property of the index or any other index property. So that makes sense. I have to preserve what index properties were there before and compress to, etc., and they get preserved as we go. That made total sense. The docs say no. Go to somewhere else in the docs, in the alter table command, the docs say yes. They say, when you're specifying the global partition index clause, it says you cannot specify table compression, fair enough, but you can specify index compression. So we have a little anomaly in the docs, we have a little anomaly in the actual functionality, and so the best thing I can say is watch this space. I'll have a look and see if it's a bug, see if obviously one of these docs must be wrong, and whichever way it is, we'll get it sorted out. So at least we have a consistency across the entire gamut of things. So keep an eye out for that. There we go. 5 minutes, we can get another one done. Union all limits. Here's the question that came in. We have a tool that generates SQL to consolidate data from many different sources. And that can result in statements with huge amounts of union all. Are there any limits we need to worry about? And my answer to that is no and yes. And the reason I say that is, the classic it depends. It's not necessarily a discussion about union all that's the issue here. It's a discussion about SQL in general. Let's do a demo. So what I thought I'd do is I would build an SQL that has lots of union alls rather than type one in. So I'm starting with select star from emp, and then 100 times I'm adding to that SQL union all select star from emp. So it's just select star from emp, union all select star from emp, etc., etc., etc. And then I'm going to record how long it takes to actually open that cursor and fetch a row from it. So S timestamp, open the cursor, fetch a row, and then spit out the delta between those two things. Just as a quick heads up, the reason you really need to fetch is Oracle, the database, is very, very lazy. It says, why do work unless I have to? If you open the cursor, well, who cares? I don't have to do a thing in the world until you actually fetch a row. Because if you never fetch a row, why would I waste the effort of parsing it, etc.? So even if that's an invalid SQL, you'll often find that doing an open does nothing. It's the first fetch that then does the parse and the execute and then the first X. So if you're testing an SQL, make sure you do a fetch as well. But I'm just fetching the first row. So it doesn't matter how many rows are in the emp table. I just need to fetch one row. Fantastic. Look at that. 100 union alls, literally 2 centiseconds. Right? Is that right? Yeah, 200ths of a second. Fantastic. That's awesome. Let's make it 1,000. So 10 times slower or 10 times bigger and a little bit slower. This time 0.4 of a second. But the fact that it's not exactly 10 times slower, it's a little bit more than that, maybe is a bit of a red flag. And so let me do this one, which is 5,000. So you would expect if it was 0.4 of a second for 1,000 and we had a linear growth, you'd expect 2 seconds for 5,000. And as you can see, it's not. It's 12 seconds. And I was going to do, when I was building this demo earlier today, I had 10,000. But 10,000 went for a minute 30, and I figured I wouldn't be able to talk at length for a minute 30 in an office hours session. So yeah, it grows. It looks like it grows along an exponential curve. Now, if we look at what's going on here, it's not necessarily the number of union alls. It's simply the size and complexity of that SQL statement. And so as a result, it's the parse time. We can actually see, I've ordered these here. So what I've done is I've said, go get the SQL, the length of the SQL, and the cost of running it. So here's our first SQL, just 100 union alls. We can see 123 buffer gets. That's because we had to do a bit of dictionary reading. So this was the most costly SQL to actually parse in terms of looking at the dictionary cache. But then we actually just fetched one row. The elapsed time was 20,000 microseconds or 2 centiseconds. And we consume 7 megabytes of memory to actually parse and process that SQL. When we got to 1,000 rows, the SQL was longer, 75 megabytes of memory just to handle all the parsing costs. And you can see the actual cost to run it was near zero. 4 logical IOs is nothing, but we burned up 75 megabytes of memory and 0.4 of a second of CPU. It's all just hardcore CPU time. And then when we got to the last one, our biggest one with 5,000 rows, look at this. 380 megabytes of your SGA got burned up in your library cache just to parse this fellow. Once again, instantaneous runtime in terms of when it finally finished the parsing, but 380 megabytes of memory, and all of that time that we saw before, that 10 seconds, was all heavy-duty CPU time, absolutely burning a hole in your server. So what I'm saying, it's not necessarily the fact that you have all these union alls. It's the fact that you're lobbing these giant SQLs at your library cache. So you're doing an enormous amount of memory that's going to get burned up. An enormous amount of CPU is going to get burned up because of the parsing costs. And here's the clear one that's a problem. While you're doing that, if you're doing, that's obviously a trivial example here with just select star from emp, but if you're doing select star from 150 different tables in a union all with the same structure, then all of those objects are going to be subject to library cache locks because people can't be dropping or altering those objects while you're parsing that enormous query. So if you get something that's parsing for 30 seconds, literally those objects are pretty much going to be frozen in time, plus a whole lot of other queries trying to parse those objects are probably going to be frozen in time while you parse this one. So just be aware of that there's enormous cost in terms of CPU, memory, and locking on your library cache, not due to union all, just because you have ginormous SQL statements. So just be aware of that. And look at that. Oh, look, literally it just went 10 o'clock. How's that? So thank you very much for your time. I do need to say there is no session next month. And if you're wondering why there is no session next month, well, it's AI world. I'll literally probably be I'll actually be on a plane home to Australia on the day that office hours is meant to be happening. And so, yeah, so I'd be surprised if you see many office hours or Ask Tom live sessions next month because all of us in Oracle are very busy getting ready for AI World to make it hugely popular and success. As I said before, if you can get along, that'd be fantastic. If you can't come to my sessions and you're in America, come along, say hi at the database booth. I'm going to be sitting there as much as I can. That's the highlight for me, funnily enough, is not doing sessions. The highlight for me at these conferences is just hanging around, chewing the fat with people about stuff. That's why I had a fantastic time in Poland, Romania, and Austria recently. As always, thank you for giving up your time. I get paid to do this and I love doing it. You're the guys that have to do all the hard work and concentrating. So thank you for giving up your time. Hope you found something useful out of today's session. The recording will go up in due process. But until then, Look, I just checked the chat line. This is telling me do. This is saying wants me to do a double session the month after. Oh my God, that's all too hard. Judith, you're killing me. You're killing me here. Anyway, thank you all for your time, and we'll see you again soon on the next Ask Tom Live. Bye for now, everybody.